This is an ad by Regain Couples Therapy. Let's be honest, loving your partner doesn't mean you always like them, and guess what? That's normal. Regain offers couples therapy that's flexible, affordable, and 100% online. Whether you're reconnecting or working through conflict, Regain is here to support you both. See why people wish they'd try couples therapy sooner. Visit regain.com/couplespod to get 10% off your first month. That's regain.com/couplespod.
This is an ad by Regain Couples Therapy and features real testimonials.
This was our first time trying therapy, and honestly, it was long overdue. Looking back, we just wish we had started sooner.
Regain's qualified therapists help couples when they can't get there on their own.
We thought it was intimacy issues, but Andrea helped us uncover a deeper root cause we hadn't even realized was there.
Visit regain.com/couplespod to get 10% off your first month. Regain, powered by BetterHelp.
Join us and unwind with a good book. Welcome to Relaxing Reads.
Hi, it's Deb in Halifax.
Hi, it's Simone in Vancouver.
Hey, it's Tanya in Edmonton.
So we recently shared our thoughts on Jane Corry's Coming to Find You, and today is the day we finally get to interview Jane. But before we start, Deb, why don't you give us a little recap about what the book was about?
Our latest read, Coming to Find You by Jane Corry, is a gripping and emotional thriller. When her family tragedy is splashed across the newspapers, Nancy decides to disappear. Her grandmother's beautiful Regency house in a quiet seaside village seems like the safest place to hide. But the old house has its own secrets and a chilling wartime legacy. Now someone knows the truth about the night Nancy's mother and stepfather were murdered. Someone knows where to find her, and they have nothing to lose.
Such a great book and so many questions for Jane. Hello, Jane.
Hello. So lovely to hear you. Thank you so much.
Hello. Oh, we
Hello.
love your book.
Oh, do. Thank you so much. That's lovely. I must say here that we have some great friends who live in Toronto, and I have visited twice. It's a beautiful place, Canada, and I hope to come again before long.
Oh, please do. We'll get together for tea or wine.
That would be
or
wonderful.
Both. Well, Jane, tell us about the seaside village. It's Sidmouth, is it?
It is, yes. It's a beautiful seaside village in Devon, and in fact, I moved here with my husband some years ago, and I didn't really want to mention the name of it in the book, but it became more and more difficult not to. So shall I tell you the story behind it?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it does. It sounds like, a place that can share so many stories, and we were wondering what your connection might be to it.
Right. Well, I was born in London. But when I got married for the second time, my husband knew Sidmouth and suggested we move down here. And shortly after doing that, I was in the gym and I overheard this conversation. And it's amazing what you can hear in the gym sometimes, isn't it? And I heard somebody say that the locals had burnt their weapons on a hill nearby at the end of the Second World War. So I was unable to resist asking them why. So I went over and said, excuse me, I heard your conversation just now and I wasn't eavesdropping, I just heard it. Why did people burn their weapons? And they told me about Churchill's secret army, which I had never heard about. So Churchill was the Prime Minister in Britain during the Second World War, and he had recruited secretly through his men. He'd recruited ordinary men and women in seaside towns in particular because they were worried that we would be invaded by sea during the Second World War. They recruited them just to observe what went on in Britain if Germans invaded. So, for example, they would recruit a mother who, if the Germans invaded and walked up the high street, could then report to someone who could then tell other people in the armed forces what was happening. So it was really like recruiting spies. And what really struck me was that these were people who hadn't been trained, but were then going to be trained to do this, but they were just ordinary people who were doing this, and they were doing it for their country. So the idea immediately came into my head that maybe somebody running a bed and breakfast, I don't know whether you call them bed and breakfasts in Canada.
Yeah.
They're basically houses that people rent out. Yes, I mean, in those days, they were actually called boarding houses. It made me think of a character, and immediately I thought of her name Elizabeth, because that was very much a name of somebody in the Second World War. It was a popular name. And what it might be for Elizabeth if she was recruited into Churchill's secret army. And then you always have to think about the motivation behind a character. Why might she be motivated? And then the idea came to me that maybe her son had gone away to fight. Maybe he was missing. Maybe she wanted to do something to do her part for Britain. But at the same time, I always like to write books from the point of view of two different characters. And I don't know whether you know about this, but I trained as a journalist. And then I took a rather unusual job. When my first marriage ended, I took a job as a writer in residence of a high-security male prison. I didn't really want to do it. I know, I was very scared. But, you know, as a single mother with 3 children, I did have maintenance, but I needed a more reliable source of income than my freelance journalist column. And so I did this job, and it made me very interested in how crime affected families. Obviously, families of the victims, also though families of people who'd committed crimes. And one man said to me that his mother couldn't go out of the house after the crime that he'd committed. And I then thought about what it would be like for these people. The phrase for it in prison is called living under a silent sentence. So it's a sentence that hasn't been passed down to these families by law, but it's a sentence that they have to live under because someone in their family has done something awful. And that led to my second character, who's called Nancy. And Nancy's stepbrother has committed a dreadful crime, and she runs to the family house to escape the press interest. Now, the family house is the same boarding house that Elizabeth ran during the Second World War. They're not related. In fact, it's a bit complicated. They're sort of related through godparents, but they didn't know each other. Elizabeth is long dead, but Nancy comes to that house, and she finds out that Elizabeth once lived there, and she discovers that Elizabeth has a secret. And I can't really tell you anymore because it would spoil the plot. but it's a story about these 2 women, Nancy and Elizabeth, who live in the same house 80 years apart. And it does end happily. I do like to wrap things up happily.
We actually just finished reading it, so we had a little discussion about it. We all thoroughly enjoyed it. One of the things we were talking about, because this is our first introduction to you as an author, but, you know, for all of us, it was the fact that the story just kept us going. Like there was so much suspense and plot twists, and everyone had secrets. So it was really well written, and we quite enjoyed it. But it was also interesting, like there was that little bit of connectivity between all the characters.
Yes, and that's what I love doing. I love connecting characters. I love bringing them together. I also love twists. I'm not a good person to watch a drama with, because I'll say, I know what that is. I know what's happening. Well, if I was writing it, this is what would happen. And my husband would say, how do you know that? And I just love creating twists. So what you said has made me very happy. Thank you very much. And as I said, I love the warmth of characters.
It's Tanya and Edmonton, Jane. One of the things I loved in reading Nancy's story and Elizabeth's story and going between the two as you go through the book is it was a very kind of visceral journey for me to see the same area through both of those characters' eyes. You know, you have the present, there's the beach, there's High Street, there's Twin Chimneys, and she's living there, as a under a silent sentence. And then you go to Elizabeth's story, it's the same house, it's the same beach, but there's, the beach has got barbed wire on it and it has mines in it. And I just felt like, wow, this is the way you wrote it. It was so powerful for me to kind of see both of those physical areas, but have them be so incredibly different in terms of the experience that the characters were going through. Wow.
Well, thank you. That's really lovely of you to say that. And that's what I wanted to create, because I wanted Tall Chimneys to be a character of its own. And when I moved here, I discovered there's a beautiful museum in Sidmouth. So I approached the curator and explained that I wanted to do the research for this, and he was very helpful. And I also spoke to evacuees, people who had been evacuated to Sidmouth as children from London. I found 5 who were still alive, which I thought was amazing. And one of them is a lovely old lady called Ivy, whom I've become great friends with since. In fact, I'm getting shivers down me when I talk about it, because it's such an extraordinary thing. And Ivy told me how she'd been evacuated down here when she was only 11, and she'd come from quite a humble family in London, and she'd been sent to a rather well-to-do house near here, where she was amazed to find that the food was served at the table under what she called silver hats. So they were those sort of, I don't know if you have them in Canada, during very smart meals, your food might arrive in a restaurant with a silver dome over it to keep it warm. And she was amazed by this, and she stayed in touch with the woman who looked after her. She went back to London in her teens, she got married, she had 3 children, and she's come back to spend the rest of her days in Sidmouth. She came back 8 years ago and decided she wanted to spend her last few years here in the place where she was so happy as an evacuee.
Wow.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Oh, it's fascinating.
And I think about the evacuees, and I think about the children, how they must have felt, but their parents sending them off.
Just heartbreaking. And to have to make that decision about whether, it's meant to be safer for them, but the agony, the appalling agony of having to let your child go to a stranger. And you hear other stories about children coming back and then not bonding with their parents again.
Yeah. And it's interesting to even think about, what you just shared with us about Ivy. That was obviously a very tough time in life, but a time that probably just molded who she was as a human being. And it's that place that you have that connection to. So it's so interesting that she would not want to run from that, but it brought her back there,
Yes, exactly. No, it's really warming, isn't it?
Yeah. It really is. The characters, but also those women and folks in real life, they were so strong and so brave, but I think it always seemed to be, maybe you had to find more strength as a woman, as a mother during that time.
Yeah. And I really wanted to focus on that, because without wanting to give too much away, Elizabeth didn't have a very happy marriage in the book. She had to deal with a difficult husband, but there is, as you know, a twist with that one as well. But very hard for a mother to see her children go off to war. Very hard for a mother to let their children go as evacuees. I mean, very, very difficult time, and it's a pattern that is repeated through the generations, sadly.
Mm-hmm. We talk about history repeating itself. Was there a particular character that you felt a little more connected to or really enjoyed writing for?
Well, there was. There was, Elizabeth in particular, I have to say. Elizabeth really made me feel, I almost felt like Elizabeth at times, but I also felt very connected with Maisie, the older Maisie, when she comes back and sees the house. I love writing about old people. I think it's because we all lived in my grandmother's house until I was 12, and then we moved around the corner. But those first 12 years of my life were very bound up with my grandmother. I used to spend the evenings in her sitting room watching television, and we were very close. And in fact, she lasted to her early 90s, and she was a real inspiration to me about being brave, but also doing things and having the strength to do that. So and also my other grandmother, who sadly died before I was born, she sounded as though she had a great deal of spirit too. So I like spirited older people. And so I would say Maisie and Elizabeth, really. reached out to me.
And Vera had a lot of spirit to her as well.
Oh, yes, Vera. I wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of Vera. Yes, I know. I was just going to say, I can see Vera's face in my mind. She reminds me of a rather strict teacher I used to have, but strict, but also, kind underneath. But you would, as I said, you wouldn't want to get on the wrong side.
No.
And Jane, what about Nancy's story? Do you know somebody who was living under a silent sentence?
Well, as I said, when I was working as a writer in residence at the prison, this man told me that his mother couldn't go out of the house. But also, one of the things that happened in the prison was that every now and then the prison authorities would organize a family and friends day where the men's family and friends would come in and visit. And some of them asked me if I would like to come and meet their parents. And I mean, really, it was just such a weird, strange life going in and working in that prison. When I talk about it now, it feels almost as though it was unreal. But I went along, and if I say that many of those families did not look like the kind of families who would have people in prison, does that sound awful? It's just that they didn't. They could have been, they looked like my next door neighbors. They looked like, some of them, they looked just like ordinary people, not the kind of people who would have children who had committed some of the worst things you can imagine. Often, I have to say, through drugs and drink. So although I had never been a great drinker, I had been the kind of person who might have a couple of glasses of wine a week. I actually completely gave up alcohol when I worked there, and I haven't had a drop since because I just, as I said, I wasn't a great drinker at all. It just made me realize some of the things that people did when they weren't in control of themselves. It was very frightening. So going back to your question, seeing some of those people at the family and friends days and talking to them about what I was doing there and what my brief was from the people. I was employed by a charity to go in there, and my brief was to help people write almost anything, letters, stories, life stories. And the plan was, well, not the plan, the idea behind it is that if people write about what they have done, it makes it sink in, because many people that I came across were in denial of their crimes because they had been obviously sent to prison for them and they admitted that they had done it, but they were in denial about facing the consequences and thinking about how much they'd hurt people or scared people. And I remember helping one man write his life story, and he'd actually never killed anybody, but he had frightened people almost to death. And he actually didn't seem to think that was a big deal, but when he wrote about it, I actually burst into tears at one point. And then I thought, oh, this is dreadful. This is not professional. And I went and told someone at the prison, and they said, well, actually, it might have helped him. It might have made him realize what he'd done. And the next morning, when I went back, he said, well, Jen, he hadn't slept all night because he'd upset me. And I said, well, it's not me you need to think of. It's the people you nearly scared to death. And he went on writing. I helped him write his life story. I had permission from the governor to take my computer in as long as it wasn't connected to the internet. And I wrote down his story, and it won a prize. I would enter my men's work for a prison award called the Kessler Awards. And you might think, well, why should a man be allowed to win a prize when he's done the things that he had done? But actually, it changed his behavior. And I was told this by the guards and the governor, and he faced what he had done and decided that he would make a better life. And also he repented. So, I mean, it's difficult to tell, isn't it? People change their minds. You can only do what you can do. And I felt that I was meant to do this.
That's so amazing. Like, it's so nice to get this insight from you, because it just really kind of connects it all together back to the story and, everything you had to kind of look up, and you were able to meet evacuees and get all this information, that information at the gym. Sometimes it is okay to listen in on conversations.
Well, the thing is, as I said, I trained as a journalist. I still write a lot for a newspaper you may have heard of called the Daily Telegraph. So I still write for the Telegraph. And so as a journalist, you have this constant and curiosity, I'm afraid. But if you can do some good with it, then I think, I think that's important.
Yeah. And like
Absolutely.
we said, we've just been introduced to you, but we're looking forward to reading I Died on a Tuesday in one of our upcoming book club reads for sure.
That's very kind. So I don't know if you know my other books, but My Husband's Wife was my very first, and that was a Washington Post bestseller. Back in 2016, so you might like to check that one out as well. That was published in America and Canada. It came out in Britain in 2016. I think it came out in Canada and America in 2017. But as I said, it was a Washington Post bestseller, My Husband's Wife, and that was about a young woman, a woman lawyer, who's just come back from a rather unsatisfactory honeymoon and was sent by her boss to handle a criminal's appeal. And she falls for him. So, but I'm really, really thrilled to be published by Doubleday. I'm very excited about both books, and I hope your audience and everyone in America and Canada enjoys them.
Yeah,
I'm sure they certainly will. Yeah.
Catching up with what we've missed already with those reads.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Jane. We really appreciated getting, again, that insight from you. And like we said, we thoroughly enjoyed the book.
That's really kind of you. Thank you so much. It's been lovely to talk to you. And if you'd like to talk to me about I Died on a Tuesday, then I'd be very happy to talk to you about that as well.
Perfect. Yes, I'm sure we will be in touch with you to get that arranged as well, for sure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh,
she's
I
really
want to
great.
be her.
I know, she just seems so
I want to move to
lovely.
a small seaside village. And
Oh my gosh.
I don't have a first husband, but I'll try and get a first one and then a second one.
Totally. And thank you for listening to another episode of the Relaxing Reads podcast. Until next time.
Thank you for kicking back and relaxing with us. We hope you'll join us again on Relaxing Reads.